My mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye and said, "A woman like you will never deserve this house." She had no idea I was holding the deed in my purse. What I did next didn't just silence her, it changed our entire family's legacy forever. My mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye and said, "A woman like you will never deserve this house." She had no idea I was holding the deed in my purse. What I did next didn't just silence her, it changed our entire family's legacy forever. Before we dive in, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if you make it to the end, you'll discover the family secret that turned everything upside down. Don't forget to subscribe to Revenge House 7 for more luxury revenge stories that'll leave you speechless. My name is Harper, and this is the story of how I went from being the unworthy daughter-in-law to owning the very house my mother-in-law tried to steal from me. But the twist at the end? Even I didn't see it coming. Picture this. It's Thanksgiving 2023, and I'm standing in the grand foyer of the Ashford family estate, a stunning Victorian mansion in Beacon Hill, Boston, worth over $4 million. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on marble floors, and oil paintings of long-dead Ashfords stare down from gilded frames. I'd been married to their son, Daniel, for 3 years, but his mother, Victoria Ashford, never let me forget that I didn't belong. Not in her house, not in her family, and definitely not in her son's life. "Harper, darling," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she approached me in her Chanel suit. "Could you be a lamb and help the caterers in the kitchen? I'm sure you're more comfortable there than with the family discussions." The family discussions. Code for, we're talking about money and property, and the hired help shouldn't listen. My husband Daniel was across the room, laughing with his cousin Bradley about some golf tournament, completely oblivious to his mother's passive-aggressive warfare. As usual. But here's what Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew. 3 weeks earlier, I'd received a phone call that changed everything. "Mrs. Ashford," the voice on the phone had said. "This is Margaret Chen from Chun and Associates law firm. I have some rather urgent news regarding your late grandmother's estate." My grandmother, Rose Chen, had passed away 6 months earlier. Sweet, quiet Rose, who'd worked as a seamstress her entire life, lived in a tiny apartment in Chinatown, and insisted on giving me $20 every time I visited, even when I told her I didn't need it. "I'm afraid there's been a significant oversight in the probate process," the lawyer continued. "Your grandmother owned more assets than anyone realized. Much more. Turns out, my humble grandmother had been secretly investing her modest earnings for over 50 years. Every $20 bill she'd saved, every coupon she'd clipped, every penny she'd pinched had been carefully placed into a diversified portfolio that had grown to over $6 million. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was what she'd done with it before she died. The discovery 3 days before Thanksgiving, I sat in Margaret Chen's office, staring at documents that made my hands shake. "Your grandmother purchased the Ashford estate 6 months ago," Margaret explained, sliding papers across the mahogany desk. "She bought it outright, cash, through a shell company. According to these documents, she did it specifically to, and I quote, ensure my granddaughter, Harper, never has to beg for a place at any table again." I couldn't breathe. She bought Daniel's family home? She bought it and she left it to you, along with instructions that you should only reveal ownership when the time feels right to teach some people about respect. Margaret smiled. "Your grandmother seems to have been quite the strategist." My sweet, quiet grandmother had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. The Ashfords had been so financially overextended trying to maintain their lifestyle that they'd been forced to sell the family estate. They just didn't tell anyone. Instead, they'd arranged to lease it back from the anonymous buyer to save face. For 6 months, they'd been living in their own house as tenants, paying rent to my deceased grandmother, and they had no idea. "There's more," Margaret said, pulling out another folder. "Your grandmother also purchased the Ashford family business, Ashford and Sons Real Estate Development. Apparently, they were about to declare bankruptcy." I stared at the papers. My grandmother hadn't just bought a house. She'd bought an empire. And she'd left it all to me, the granddaughter they'd always seen as not good enough. "What do I do now?" I whispered. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes twinkling. Well, Harper, I'd say it's time to go home. To your house. The confrontation back at Thanksgiving dinner, I watched Victoria hold court in what she thought was still her dining room, going on about family legacy and maintaining standards. Of course, we'll need to be very careful about who we allow into the family circle, she was saying, her eyes sliding meaningfully toward me. Some people just don't understand the responsibility that comes with the Ashford name. Daniel's sister, Priscilla, nodded eagerly. Absolutely, Mother. Blood will tell, as they say. I took a sip of wine, expensive wine that I now technically owned, and decided it was time. Speaking of family legacy, I said, my voice carrying across the table, I have some interesting news to share. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. She hated when I spoke during family discussions. Oh. Daniel looked at me with surprise. What kind of news, honey? I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope Margaret had given me. The room went quiet except for the soft clinking of silverware. Well, I said, standing up slowly, I found out that someone in this room has been keeping a rather significant secret. Victoria's face went pale. Harper, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that this house was sold 6 months ago. I let that sink in for a moment, watching as Daniel's face went from confusion to dawning horror. And I know who bought it. That's impossible, Priscilla sputtered. This house has been in our family for generations. Has it? I pulled the deed from the envelope and placed it on the table. Because according to these legal documents, this house belongs to Rose Chen's estate. And Rose Chen left everything to her granddaughter. Victoria stood up so fast her chair fell over. You're lying. This is some kind of sick joke. The only joke, I said calmly, is that you've been paying rent to live in what you thought was your own house. To my grandmother, actually. The woman you once told Daniel wasn't refined enough to be invited to our wedding. The silence in that room was deafening. Daniel's face was ashen. Harper, I don't understand. How is this possible? It's possible because your family was so deep in debt that you had to sell everything to avoid bankruptcy. But instead of telling the truth, you decided to maintain the illusion by leasing back your own home. I looked directly at Victoria. The anonymous buyer your real estate agent told you about? That was my grandmother. Prove it, Victoria hissed, but her voice was shaking. I pulled out my phone and called Margaret Chen, putting her on speaker. Margaret? Could you please explain to the Ashford family who owns the property at 247 Marlborough Street? Certainly, Harper. The property is owned by the Rose Chen Trust, with Harper Chen Ashford as the sole beneficiary. The current occupants are leasing the property on a month-to-month basis, with rent due on the 1st of each month. Margaret's voice continued, crisp and professional. I should also mention that the lease agreement includes a clause allowing the owner to terminate the arrangement with 30 days' notice. You could have heard a pin drop. The power shift Victoria sank back into her chair, her face gray. This can't be happening. Oh, but it is, I said, walking around the table to stand behind her chair. And here's the beautiful part. My grandmother left me detailed instructions on what to do with this information. I pulled out Rose's letter, written in her careful handwriting. My dearest Harper, if you're reading this to the Ashford family, it means they've pushed you too far. These people need to learn that wealth isn't about money, it's about character. And you, my dear granddaughter, have more character in your little finger than that entire family has combined. Daniel was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Harper, why didn't you tell me? Tell you what, Daniel? That your mother has spent 3 years trying to make me feel like I don't belong in this family? That she's questioned my worth, my background, my right to be here at every single gathering? I folded the letter carefully. Or should I have told you that you never once stood up for me? The truth hit him like a physical blow. Because it was true. Every snide comment, every passive-aggressive insult, every time his mother had made me feel small, he'd stood by and let it happen. I didn't realize. He stammered. You didn't want to realize, I corrected. It was easier to let me be the outsider than to confront your mother. Victoria finally found her voice. What do you want? Money? Is this some kind of extortion? I laughed, actually laughed. Victoria, I don't want your money. I have my own now. What I want is something you've never given me. Respect. I walked back to my seat and sat down calmly. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to continue living in this house because despite everything, I'm not cruel enough to make you homeless on Thanksgiving. Relief flickered across her face. But I continued. Things are going to change. Dramatically. The new rules. I pulled out a sheet of paper I'd prepared earlier. These are the new house rules, effective immediately. Rule number 1. This is my house now, and you will treat me with the respect due to both your landlord and your daughter-in-law. The snide comments, the passive-aggressive insults, and the attempts to exclude me from family discussions end today. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Rule number 2. Daniel, you will attend marriage counseling with me, or you will find somewhere else to live. I'm done being married to someone who treats me like a guest in my own life. Daniel nodded mutely. Rule number 3. Priscilla, you will apologize for every rude comment you've made about my family, my background, and my suitability for this family. In writing, with specifics. Priscilla looked like she wanted to argue, but a glance at the deed on the table silenced her. And rule number 4. I said, saving the best for last, we're going to have weekly family dinners. Real family dinners, where we actually talk to each other like human beings. And Victoria, you're going to learn to cook because I'm tired of watching you order catered food and pretend you made it yourself. I don't know how to cook, Victoria whispered. Then you'll learn. My grandmother's recipe book is in the kitchen. Start with her dumpling soup. It was Daniel's favorite when we were dating, remember? Before you convinced him it was too ethnic for family dinners. The color that had been slowly returning to Victoria's face drained away again. You knew about that? I know about a lot of things, Victoria. I've been keeping track. The transformation the next few months were interesting. Victoria, faced with the reality that her behavior could literally leave her homeless, began what I can only describe as the world's most reluctant charm offensive. She started small, actually saying please and thank you when asking me to pass the salt. Then progressed to asking about my day without looking like she was being tortured. The cooking lessons were hilarious. Watching a woman who'd never so much as boiled water try to fold dumplings was oddly therapeutic. She burned the first 3 batches, but by the 4th week, she was actually producing something edible. This is harder than it looks, she admitted one afternoon, flour in her perfectly styled hair. Most worthwhile things are, I replied, showing her how to crimp the edges properly. Daniel, meanwhile, was working harder on our marriage than he had in the 3 years we'd been together. The counseling sessions were brutal at first, lots of tears, accusations, and uncomfortable truths. But slowly, we started to find our way back to each other. I'm sorry I let her treat you that way, he said one night, as we lay in bed in what used to be his childhood room and was now our master suite. I was a coward. Yes, you were, I agreed. But cowardice can be cured. Cruelty is harder to fix. Priscilla's written apology was 8 pages long and surprisingly sincere. Apparently, facing the possibility of losing her inheritance had given her some perspective on what really mattered. But the real transformation was in me. For the first time in my marriage, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't trying to prove my worth or earn my place at the table. I owned the table. Literally. The confidence that came with that knowledge changed everything. I spoke up in conversations. I made decisions about the house without asking permission. I invited my own friends and family over without checking if it was appropriate. And slowly, grudgingly, the Ashfords began to treat me like I belonged. The business revelation 3 months after Thanksgiving. Margaretchen called with more news. Harper, I think you need to come to the office. We've discovered something else about your grandmother's purchases. When I arrived, she handed me a thick folder marked Ashford and Sons Real Estate Development. Your grandmother didn't just buy the company to save it from bankruptcy, Margaret explained. She bought it because she discovered something the Ashfords didn't know. The company owns the development rights to a massive waterfront project in South Boston. I flipped through the documents, my eyes widening. How massive? $2 billion massive. The city approved the project 5 years ago, but the previous owner never moved forward. Your grandmother realized the potential and bought the company specifically for those rights. My hands were shaking again. So, the company isn't just saved from bankruptcy. The company is about to become one of the most valuable development firms in Boston. Your grandmother didn't just leave you a house, Harper. She left you an empire. The final confrontation that evening, I called a family meeting in the study, my study in my house. Victoria sat stiffly in her chair, Daniel beside her looking nervous, and Priscilla perched on the edge of the sofa like she was ready to run. I have some more news about Grandmother Rose's estate, I began, watching their faces carefully. Victoria's eye twitched. More. It turns out that when she bought Ashford & Sons, she wasn't just saving the company. She was positioning it for the biggest development project in Boston's history. I spread the waterfront development plans across the coffee table. These are the blueprints for South Harbor Commons. $2 billion in luxury condominiums, retail space, and commercial development. And thanks to my grandmother, we own the exclusive rights to build it. The silence stretched for a full minute. Finally, Daniel spoke. We. That depends, I said, looking at each of them in turn. See, I could develop this project myself. Hire my own team, use my own contractors, keep all the profits. Or, I paused, letting the tension build. Or, I could honor the Ashford family tradition of working together. But that would require trust. Real trust. And respect. Victoria leaned forward. What are you saying? I'm saying that if we can truly become a family, not just people who share a name, but people who support and respect each other, then Ashford & Sons can return to being a family business. With me as the majority owner, but all of us working together. I pulled out a contract I'd had Margaret draft. This partnership agreement gives each of you a stake in the South Harbor project. Not because you're entitled to it, but because I choose to share it. If you choose to earn it. Daniel reached for the contract with shaking hands. What do we have to do? Be the family my grandmother thought you could be. The family she was investing in when she saved your business and your home. The twist 6 months later, we broke ground on South Harbor Commons. The press coverage was extensive, the Ashford family's triumphant return, and from near bankruptcy to billion-dollar development. What the press didn't know, what even the family didn't know, was the final piece of my grandmother's puzzle. I found it in her safety deposit box, which Margaret Chin finally opened after all the estate paperwork was complete. Inside was a single photograph and a letter that made me cry right there in the bank vault. The photograph showed a young Victoria Ashford, Daniel's mother, standing next to my grandmother outside the very house where we now lived. They were both young, maybe in their 20s, and they had their arms around each other like best friends. The letter was addressed to me. Asterisk, my dearest Harper, if you're reading this, then you've successfully brought the Ashford family back together. What you don't know is that Victoria and I were once very close friends. We met when we were both young women working in the garment district. She was struggling to make ends meet, just like I was. When she met Daniel's father, she saw a chance at a better life. I didn't blame her for taking it, but wealth changed her, made her forget where she came from. She began to look down on people like us, people like you. I bought the house and the business not just to save them, but to remind Victoria who she used to be. To remind her that worth isn't about money or status, it's about how you treat people. I hope she remembers. I hope you can help her remember. All my love, Grandmother Rose. P.S. Look in the bottom drawer of the desk in the study. There's one more surprise. Asterisk in the bottom drawer, I found property deeds to 12 buildings in Chinatown, buildings that housed dozens of families, small businesses, and community centers. All owned by Rose Chin. All now owned by me. My grandmother hadn't just been a secret millionaire. She'd been a secret philanthropist, using her wealth to protect her community while teaching her granddaughter's new family about respect and humility. The resolution that evening, I showed Victoria the photograph and the letter. She stared at the picture for a long time, her fingers tracing the edges. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. I remember that day, she whispered. Rose and I had just gotten our first paychecks from the factory. We felt so rich with our $12 each. She never stopped caring about you, I said softly. Even when you stopped caring about people like her. Victoria nodded, unable to speak. She left us more than money. I continued. She left us a chance to be better than we were. Today, Victoria and I cook dinner together every Sunday. She's learned to make Rose's dumplings almost as well as my grandmother did. Daniel has become the husband I always knew he could be, supportive, protective, and proud to have me as his partner in both marriage and business. Priscilla runs the community outreach program for our development projects, making sure we never forget that luxury should lift up communities, not displace them. And me? I'm no longer the woman who didn't deserve the house. I'm the woman who saved it, who saved the family, and who honors my grandmother's legacy every single day. The Ashford family name is back on top, but now it represents something different. Not just wealth and status, but generosity and respect for everyone, regardless of their background. My grandmother was right. Wealth isn't about money. It's about character. And sometimes, the best way to build character is to lose everything and then choose to lift others up when you get it back. The house still stands on Marlborough Street, more beautiful than ever. But now it's not just a symbol of old money and exclusivity. It's a home where a seamstress's granddaughter sits at the head of the table, and everyone who enters is treated with the respect that Rose Chin taught me everyone deserves. That's the true Ashford legacy now. And I think my grandmother would be proud.